There's a number of things, right? In terms of sales enablement remotely, you need to be granular and relevant. Not being data-led is a big mistake, and everything should be data-led.
Hello and welcome to Sales Gambit. I'm your host, Ashish, CEO of Convin, a conversation intelligence platform for the inside sales team. In today's episode, we will discuss what sales enablement is and how to design a high-performing sales enablement program for remote sales teams. And for that purpose, we have Celine Grey with us today. Celine has been in sales for approximately 20 years now, and she has served as a sales manager, as a sales director, head of sales enablement, and now is the director of revenue intelligence at Oyster. When we reached out to Celine, she suggested that we talk through sales enablement specifically for remote teams. And we couldn't have been happier actually. We wanted to cover this topic for a while, and who better than an industry leader like Celine? Celine, we are so happy to have you with us today. Welcome to Sales Gambit.
Thank you very much, Ashish. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. So before we jump into today's topic, Celine, we would love to know about how's your journey started, and today you're leading the revenue intelligence part for Oyster, right? So how have you covered that journey? It would be great for our audience to know that.
Sales is a passion of mine, and it started quite early, actually. It started when I was 14. My mum was a florist, and she was selling flowers, and flowers is not a first necessity item. So I learned very young to do that qualification about people's intent as they walked into the shop. So was it a gift? Was it for them? You know, what's the budget? What's the purpose? Who is it for? And so on and so forth. And this is something actually that I've taken throughout my career. I moved to banking and I sold financial product. And within 5 years, I decided this was a market that was a bit slow. So I moved to Dublin in Ireland, where you had a lot of American companies at the time setting up shop. And I work for the like of Gateway Computers and Oracle. And ever since, I've grown my career, as you mentioned, to sales leader and sales enablement, working for the like of Tableau or Blue Wolf IBM, and recently Peakon, a Workday company. I've actually never stopped selling. I believe that sales done well is one of the best jobs in the world. It should be taught at university, because without selling, you don't get revenue. Without revenue, you don't get a company, right? So this is something that is very, very important for me.
Very interesting. And I'd love to tell you that I am of the same view that sales as a subject should be taught to everyone, actually, and it should be like a basic subject like everything else, right? Where people need to learn what sales really is. Great. And would you be happy to tell us about your journey at Oyster? Like how exactly, what kind of stuff do you run at Oyster?
Yeah, sure. Currently, I'm leading the revenue acceleration effort at Oyster. Oyster is a company that is on a mission to create a more equal world. And we do that by making it possible for companies anywhere to recruit anybody else anywhere in the world. So we hear a lot about talent shortage, right? We don't believe this is exactly true. There may be a limited pool of talent that live within 20 kilometers or commute distance of your physical office. But as soon as you start tapping into a global pool of talents, then you waive those limitations for the company. So it allows for amazing talent to join amazing companies, for amazing companies to hire amazing talent, for talent anywhere to have opportunities without living on the doorstep of a Silicon Valley. But also because we work in a distributed manner, it means there's a much kinder impact on the planet with less commute in and back from the office.
Makes sense. Let's quickly jump in today's topic. I'm sure most of the audience watching this are already aware, but you'd love to understand, how do you define sales enablement and its need today? It's a very basic question, but it would be great to start from here.
I think the sales enablement is really that thing, is do the people have got the skills to be successful? So skills and competency. Are they doing the activity, and what can we support in order to make sure that the activity they're doing are the right type of activity to yield result? What are the tools and processes that we can help with and that can make them successful? And it's that underlying data and the ability to be able to lead with data and being able to measure everything. So if you have a sales funnel, then you want to be able to measure the conversion, the velocity, the average deal size, to be able to have some idea whether you can be successful, and if you're not, where you can actually have a little impact in order to get a greater outcome. So to me, this is what sales enablement is about.
Got it. And do you see that the sales enablement is very different for remote teams now that a lot of people operate remotely versus when everyone was on the same floor? Is it really that different?
I think everything is different when it's remote. I think we make the difference between remote and distributed. Remote is you have an office and you don't work in an office, but your ways of working are the ways of the office, but you're doing that from home. Whereas distributed is opening a slightly different ways of working, right?
Got it.
And so in that aspect, I think it's slightly different. We know that the most compelling benefit of distributed working is better performance from people. There's loads of surveys out there. I don't think I need to name a few. But managing those remote teams and enabling is not that easy. And the bigger piece that is missing is that observational management that we grew up with in the business, because we used to be able to walk the floor as sales enablement leaders or as sales leaders and being able to see and take a temperature of the team. This is no longer possible.
Yeah.
Well, what that means is, as a sales enablement function, you need to be able to support the teams and the sales leaders in leading and working differently. We're very blessed at Oyster that we have a remote team that actually help us doing that. And there's a few principles of distributed work that we kind of follow.
Very interesting. Very interesting. If you can go a bit deeper, you briefly mentioned about remote teams and distributed teams and the difference that it has generally, right? I would say a lot of company today has remote and distributed teams, right? So their teams should be remote, not going to office, but they will also be distributed at multiple places, right? If you have to help them and support them from sales enablement perspective, right? How do you even start that? Like, what would be the starting point of that whole idea or whole plan?
Yeah, there's a couple of things, and I think we're going to come back to the mindset, which is massively important, right? Purely from a distribution perspective, you've got to support asynchronous work. So the ability for people to be able to work wherever their time zone at different time. And it could be collaboration on documents. You have multitude amount of tools that allow you to actually do that, right? Because it gives also people the flexibility to do the work, but in a time that actually works for them, rather than trying to jam everything, onto your calendar. So I think this is very, very important. I think also the ability when you go onto Zoom, onto calls, or onto meeting, to be really intentional and to have asynchronous work before, where you can all align and collaborate, make comments and make notes, so that when you have that meeting, there is an agenda, everybody knows what we're talking about. I mean, there's nothing new, right? It's things that used to happen in the boardroom in some of the very well-known company. It becomes very important in a remote environment, because otherwise you're going to waste a lot of time trying to actually, collect feedback from everybody where you're not necessarily time zone together. Lead with data as well. This is very important. There's a number of things, right? In terms of sales enablement remotely, you need to be granular and relevant. You need to be as relevant as possible to each audience group. So rather than do a sales program, lead with objective. Be intentional about every piece of learning that you have and how it's being delivered. What do your BDR need to do in order to be successful? What are their objectives? And then you can start working from that. What are your account executives, your account managers, your sales leaders, and so on? Once you've got these learning objectives, you can work out, who you need to partner with inside the business or outside the business in order to get that content to them, whatever that content looks like, whether it's coaching, whether it's training, whether it's process, whether it's tool, right? You need to have the tools as a company to work asynchronously as well, because otherwise all you're going to have is somebody with a lot of notes and a lot of Zooms. Lead with data. So if you have your learning objectives and you know where you're going and how it aligns to the company objectives, then by default, you have what you need to measure in order to be successful as a salesperson. So you've got a number of things. You've got the learning metrics, you've got the sales metrics, which could be activity-led. So it could be what's on your calendar, it could be the calls recording, it could be the pipeline, could be your LinkedIn. There's a number of sales metrics, but also, your funnel, your conversion rate. So you could use all of this. Use the survey as well that you have either from the onboarding or from different programs that you're running, and also the employee engagement, which is going to give you a feel in terms of growth and learning where you sit. And with all of this, you should be able to be intentional again about what you do and when you do it. And I think one of the most important thing with distributed learning, because you mentioned yourself, you've got people absolutely everywhere, right? There's a cultural aspect to it. So I think at Oyster, we have over 50 different nationalities so far, and we are scale up. And so create that emotional safety, because there's a lot of written communication, and there's many ways the reader can put their own spin on the intent or the meaning of what the other person said, and things goes like 200 kilometers per hour. So you need to create that emotional safety to allow for those critical conversations to happen, so that people don't need to be second guessing themselves or others.
Interesting. Though you have already pointed out some of the basic stuff, right, that you sort of need to create a enablement program like this, but are there any other basic other things that you think anyone, let's say I want to create a sales enablement program for my remote and distributed sales teams, what kind of other check-offs I should make sure that I've already have the checklist ready before I sort of start building that program?
Yeah. So in Sales Enablement Program, there's three things really that we need to look at. There's the onboarding. So that's your new hires coming through the doors that could easily leave within the first 90 days if you don't do that job properly, right? Let's be very clear. And then there's ad hoc learning. Your competition is running a campaign against you, you need to counter, for example, or the market trend has changed, or COVID happened. So anything that ad hoc that is there to support the sales team. And the other piece is the continuous learning. What are some of the bridges you can build in between function? How do you get a good BDR to make them into a CS or an AE, or and so on and so forth, and be able to cross? I think with all of these, you need to ask yourself a couple of questions, right? Sales is question led. What are you trying to fix, improve, or mitigate? If you can't answer that, you won't really have any result or impact, or it might be pure luck, right? If you're not fixing anything, improving anything, or mitigate anything, go and do something else, right? Go and do something that is going to be intentionally having an impact.
Makes sense.
And think of yourself, who's the audience? What's the best way to achieve this? Is it coaching? Is it training? Is it sales leadership action? Is it implementing new tools? Is it a new process? So not everything is fixed by learning. It might not even be sales enablement, right? It might be a project for your product marketing team, or it might be a project for your growth team, right? Define the audience. Who is that program for? Where are they at? What are the competency that they're at, and where do they need to be? That will give you the learning objective that you can then validate with leadership of these teams, so that you can have alignment and make sure that whatever you're creating is actually fit for purpose. Then you can collaborate with a subject matter expert that have the content, and you can do content curation or creation, or you can, then again, you activate those multiple ways to do things. You roll out your program, you over communicate, especially in a remote environment. That's very, very important. Obviously, you need a learning management system and a content management base, right? In order to be able to make sure you've got one true source of data, but you can measure. And then there's all the reporting aspect, where you're going to use your learning objective to drive your reporting metrics. You're going to be able to evaluate what's working, what's not working, and you're going to be able to optimize your program as you go through. That's how you scale as well.
Makes sense. Now that we have discussed, couple of steps, there's more, I would say that these are more like the steps to design the high performing sales enablement program, right? Can you also shed some light on what are the possible roadblocks or the issues that one might face while they're building this kind of program? See, I mean, what I understand it, this seems very easy just to say out loud. You would have actually overcome those challenges as well, right? So if you can take examples there, that would be great for our audience to learn from it.
One of the challenges is putting too much in the program, not being intentional enough. And one of the reasons is the profile of people that come into revenue acceleration or sales enablement, sales effectiveness are learners. They love learning. And so when they see great pieces of learning, the temptation is to want to share it with everybody. And so constantly asking yourself, not necessarily what are they going to learn from it, because we're going to learn from it. How is that going to help them be successful specifically? Do I have a metric that this is going to help inflex, that if I don't have it, my program, is wonky effectively? Because
Yeah.
if it's not there, I would agree. I would argue that you need to put it in a content library for self-learning and self-development, and make recommendation for the team to go, but it shouldn't be mandatory.
Okay.
So that too much of a big program, right? Not being data-led is a big mistake, and everything should be data-led. You have knowledge objective and you have action objective. So what must the people know in order to be successful? What must they be doing to be successful? And then you can map your program, because then it's easier for you to be able to measure whether it's working or not, but also it's going to create some emotional safety for the people who are going to join your program, whether they are new onboarding hires or whether they're not, because they're going to know exactly where they stand. If not, it's very difficult for them to be able to assess. And it's particularly important because when we join a new company, whatever level of satisfaction we had on what we were doing before, it's a new company, new product, it's new process, and it takes us out of our comfort zone. It takes us into that learning zone where we learn new things, we grow, we develop, but it takes us out of that comfort. So there's a level of discomfort in that stretch. We want to make sure that people don't go in panic zone. Panic zone is when you're overwhelmed, when you're stressed, when there's too much. And so it's a fine line to manage. We're not mind readers. So we need to make sure that that emotional safety during that program is there. And finally, I think it's very tempting when you've got distributed environment to give people a list of things to do for them to self-organize. And so it's balancing the human aspect in face-to-face in time zone. So at a time that is social or sociable, and the self-learn and the amount of reading and the variety of activities that you're going to give those people. Because otherwise, if I've just joined a company and all I have to do is 4 weeks of reading, I'm going to feel very lonely. I'm going to feel out of place, and you're going to break that emotional safety. So protecting the calendar of people very early on. Also, when you give them a list of people to meet, tell them why they need to meet those people. Give them some pointers on where the conversation could go. Give them a Loom video to that person's profile who's introducing themselves. And make it human, so that you create that human interaction at a distance as soon as possible. The rest, I'd say, you go back onto the principle of normal sales enablement.
Makes sense. This was a question actually that I had in my mind, right? Let's say there are two types of scenarios, Celine. One where people have been with the company and then they have shifted remote and distributed. And second, you have hired someone totally new in a remote and distributed world, right? The second case is even more painful and difficult actually to handle because they have never met you as a person. They don't know about the company yet a lot, right? They have to gather and just learn everything from scratch. Any specific problem that you have seen coming out while designing the sales enablement program for those people who have just joined the company and they're completely unaware about the culture and everything else?
I think this is incredibly relevant, your question. So important. I'm lucky that at Oyster we haven't, and there's a very good reason for this. We have what we call Oyster Academy. And Oyster Academy supports people in moving and shifting to that distributed work environment. We have some amazing people that are specialists in distributed work that have worked on a curriculum that anybody can take, by the way. So people can go into Oyster Academy and they can take that and they can get a certification of distributed work, which companies will want to know what your degree of comfort is working distributed, because not everybody wants to teach you how to work in a distributed manner. And so because we created that academy, it means that people join in and get given a guide on how to work distributed. And it's very tactical, it's very safe, and we get so much good feedback where people join and they're like, oh my God, I love this way of working. This is amazing. This is saving me time, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. So you're saying that the sales enablement has to be done very differently for these people? Like, what do you cover in Oyster Academy in general so that our audience can get a sense of it?
Yeah, it is really around the principle of remote working. So how to use the technology that allows you to work remote, but also some of the do's and don'ts of working remote. how you're going to do your team objective remotely, how you're going to do a meeting, how you're going to suggest an idea. Again, because we do a lot of things in writing, what is the best way to do this? And again, because it's very tactical, it doesn't really drastically, it's not a big push for people. It's just an easier way for doing things in that context.
Got it. So essentially, it's like creating a playbook for, someone who has completely joined you new in that remote world, and make sure that your playbook covers almost every step of you ramping them up over a period in time, right? With
Absolutely.
obviously that emotional safety net that you always mentioned, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Makes sense. So let's say someone has created this program, right? As you mentioned, right? They keep up, they kept all the things in mind, and they sort of build this program. How this can be scaled? Because scaling up is a different challenge in itself, right?
Yeah.
You might launch the program with certain specific things and certain limitations, but you will, over the period in time, you have to continuously improve and iterate on it, right? And that's how the scaling would be done. So what are the challenges that you see it in scaling, and how you can really scale these programs?
Scaling is so relevant again. I think a part of it is thinking of the scaling as you design the program.
Okay.
Big, audacious goal. So if I have 100 people in the go-to-market team today, and I'm designing a program, I'm going to design a program for 500 to 1,000 people, or at least having a program that is going to enable me to grow. We roughly know how a company scale, right, in terms of organization. So it's making sure that what we build is iterative, and that we're very intentional about what we do, but that if there's a new, if there's a split, for example, segmentation or whatever happens in the business, which is what scaling is about, it's adapting to that organization being able to grow, we are able to do it, and we're able to do it reasonably easily. I think if you start with the objective in mind, and you start thinking of the process of the delivery, the audience, etc., and you start thinking at least 5 times bigger than what you are, the scale is not going to be so much. The second aspect of this is the data. In order to scale your program and be intentional and iterative, you actually need to know where you're going. And again, that goes back to your objective and the ability to be able to report, and to report on multiple dimensions. So there's your onboarding survey, right? But then at the end of the onboarding, you should have a coaching plan for the new hire, so that when they go with a manager, they have that coaching plan that can work on those one-to-one, skills, and work on these incremental gains that is going to help them make successful. And so that you can measure the progress of this, for example. The other thing is looking at the team as a whole, right? Do we have a particular issue on a particular team, and can we fix that issue at onboarding, or does it need to be later, and so on and so forth. So that iteration goes through the analysis of data that you have in order to be able to constantly improve your program, whichever program it is, whether it's the continuous or the onboarding.
Makes sense. And you briefly mentioned this coaching program, one-on-one for agents, right? If I talk about a sales team of 100 people or a GTM team of 100 people, won't it become very difficult for us to design that, where you'd say that, hey, one-to-one coaching sessions will also be a part of that sales enablement program? Won't it limit my scale, and won't it become very difficult for it to design for everyone individually? Or are you suggesting to design it going forward from a team perspective?
I still suggest to design it from the one-to-one perspective. So there's a couple of things, right? I really truly believe that coaching, sales coaching, is so key and important to the success of a sales organization. And I can't wait for it to be completely mainstream. So the couple of things, right? You recruit somebody on a set of competency that fits a job spec, and then you onboard them to help them, and then you have a certification of some shape and form. Very often it's a real play in sales and knowledge test. From that, you should have an observation sheet. It can be very simple, right? It can be a scorecard on what the person is doing really well and what they could change in order to bring the game to the next level. From there, you can hand over to the sales manager who can help them coach into the one-to-one on the things. There's one thing. Second, there's the technology that allows you to get some data in order to be able to coach your team on what they're doing right and wrong. And third one, there's the individual sales funnel. You could have your sales funnel that has, you've got conversion rates. So let's say you've got, I don't know, lead, qualification, evaluation, negotiation, close. Let's say very, very simple. You may have some people that are very, very good at moving to evaluation, but then, not good at negotiation. You may have people who are very good at negotiation, but don't have enough lead in their pipeline. You might have other people that completely different scenario. If you try to just push the same training on all of these people, we need
it's going to be
very I'm going to caveat that. We need a standard. We need a sales methodology. We need a standard in terms of best practice. Right, for everybody. But then after, the advantage of having that one-to-one plan and that one-to-one look in the funnel is instead of having big action all the time, you can have individual action and just do that coaching in one-to-one that incrementally is going to get you a far greater output at the bottom of the funnel. I'm not sure if that's clear, but
no, that really makes sense, right? So instead of pushing down one sort of enablement program through everyone, you were saying that we should first identify where they are lacking, right?
Yeah, as a one-to-one coaching,
Yes, and then walk them through that entire funnel or where they can and how exactly they can improve. Very interesting point of view. The last question that I would have in this series is, once you have scaled the program, right? As you said earlier as well, briefly, that reporting is very important, right? You being able to measure everything out of this is very important, right? So how does someone measure the effectiveness of their sales enablement program? Once they have built it, scaled it, how do they measure it? And then how do they figure out that they need to change few things or tweak few things here and there to keep it running?
So again, you've got the onboarding, you've got the ad hoc, and you've got the continuous. So for the onboarding, you have an onboarding dashboard, and you need to agree on which set of metrics you're going to want. It depends what you're working on, right? What is, are you working on SMB, mid-market, enterprise? There's a number of metrics, but there's a couple of basic one, which is, how long does it take for the team members to hit the target, the full target? That's one of them. What is the average deal size in the first month, 2 months, 3 months? Again, depending of the market you're working on. What is the percentage of self-generated pipeline the first month, 2 months, 3 months as well? What are the individual conversion rate versus the rest of their team? So there's for the onboarding, there's a lot of how long is it going to take to that person to reach that point, and also this point. There's also learning metrics. Have they completed the task during the onboarding, or have they not? Are they talking to the client? Is there activity as well that is based? Do they know the product? Do they know the platform? And all that kind of stuff. In terms of ad hoc program, you're fixing something in particular, or you're improving something, or you're mitigating a risk. So you've got this. So I'll give you an example. You might lose versus a competitor more than often at a particular point. So you're going to do a campaign, you're going to do maybe how to handle checks, you're going to do a number of activities, and then the result is that improving or not. So that's very black and white. And finally, for the bridges, it goes back in terms of the people moving and how successful they are in their new roles. So you go back to the onboarding dashboard, kind of, but with the metrics of the role that they're going to.
Makes sense. Very interesting approach to this entire thing, Celine. These were the questions that I had for you today. And, thank you so much for coming to Sales Gambit and sharing such valuable insights. I'm pretty much sure the session would have been, very helpful for the salespeople. And it's terrific to have you.
Thank you very much, Ashish. It's been a great pleasure talking, as always.
Sure. Great. Thanks for coming up.
Ashish, it's been a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope this is helpful.
Definitely helpful. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.